All right, let's talk about the lower middle class. What do we know about the lower middle class? The lower middle class, their incomes are going to range from about $50 to $100,000. Again, that's just a range. Some may be outside of that range one way or another, depending on the region that they live in or the jobs that they have. Their percent of the population is anywhere from about 30 to 35% of the US population. What kind of jobs would we be talking about when we're talking about lower middle class people? We'd be talking about professional people, people who usually have degrees, but they are not as highly paid. Teachers, nurses, police officers. These would be examples of some lower middle class occupations, maybe an office manager or an administrative assistant who is well paid. They would be lower middle class people. So, in terms of their level of education, most of them have a college degree, and many of them will send their children to public schools, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone. Probably middle of the road public schools. It may depend on what type of neighborhood they live in. I would argue that out of all the social classes, the lower middle class is sort of the most integrated with other classes and the most likely to intermingle with people who are slightly above them in the upper middle class or slightly below them in the lower class, or I'm sorry, in the working class. So, what characteristics would they have with their children's schools? The schools might have, reasonably qualified teachers, reasonable um, buildings, not overcrowded or overwhelmed. Would they want their kids to go to college? Yes, they would want their kids to go to college. Although they're probably going to struggle a lot to afford to send their kids to college because college tuition is very high. If you have to pay college tuition for 2 or 3 kids, that's going to be another challenge that you would face as an upper middle class parent. So it's more and more difficult for them to do that, and many lower middle class kids end up graduating and going on to do lower middle class jobs like their parents had, but carrying with them a tremendous burden of debt. The colleges that they would go to would often be state schools, maybe regional ones, less prestigious ones. Here in our state, it might be a place like Frostburg or Salisbury or Morgan State. These are colleges that have reasonable reputations in the regions that they're from, and many of the kids who go there are from lower middle class backgrounds. So, what about their homes? They're going to have comfortable homes in a very wealthy area, like we are living in suburban DC. It might be a townhouse, it might be an older single family home. Um, in other parts of the country, they might be able to afford a fairly nice, comfortable single family home, maybe 1 car garage and 3 or 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. They won't necessarily have some of the luxuries and amenities that the people in the upper class had in or upper middle class had in their homes. Division of household labor. In the lower middle class, we're going to see again moms doing most of the work, but dad's going to do a little more. He may take the kids to soccer practice or coach their team. He might cook once or twice a week, maybe more, depending on the person. Um, but mom's still doing most of it. And the kids here are going to do some work too. They may have a chore list that they have to do. Maybe as they get older, they have to take out the garbage or clean up their plate or do dishes once or twice a week. So while all of the family's going to be involved somewhat, mom's still doing most of it. Mom's probably the director of it. Dad does a little bit, and the kids do a little bit as well. Would they have paid labor? Probably not. That would be a real luxury. They might have to pay for childcare if they're both working, but other than that, paid labor is not going to be the norm in this social class. So let's go down to the next one, the working class. The working class represents about 25 to 30% of the US population. Working class people make anywhere from, maybe $25,000, $30,000 on the lower end, up to, $75,000 on the higher end. Working class jobs tend to be what we call blue collar jobs or manual labor jobs. Things like factory workers, electricians, truck drivers, plumbers. A predominantly female working class occupation would be a hairdresser. So if you know someone who's in any of those kind of occupations, delivery drivers, those people are working class people. Again, it's about 30%, 25% of the population. Oh, I look terrible doing that. Got to edit that. Again, it's about 25 to 30% of the U.S. population. And it used to be the largest social class, but the numbers of people in that social class have been shrinking as we've seen deindustrialization and jobs have moved overseas. Stop. The working class. So I said it's about 25 to 30% of the population. What kinds of education would their kids have? Their kids are going to have high school, maybe some education beyond that if they could afford it, but they would really, really struggle to afford that. In terms of working class people themselves, most of them have high school plus something. Maybe they have high school plus some vocational training. That's very common, or an apprenticeship through a union, or maybe they work to get their CDL license so that they can be a truck driver or delivery driver, or go to cosmetology school so that they can cut hair. So it's very common in this class to have the base level high school education, but something on top of that. And increasingly, we're requiring more and more trainings for those folks. Maybe some of them now might get an associate's degree so that they can be in a mechanic program or something like that. So again, they might want their kids to go to college, but their kids are going to struggle with that, partly because their kids are often going to schools that are not particularly fabulous. They may be a little overcrowded, they may be understaffed or under-resourced, they might be older buildings, they might not be able to afford it. That's a huge factor as well. So if you're a very talented working class kid, you might get into a college, but can your parents really afford to send you there? And that's going to be a huge barrier towards upward mobility. Their homes, a lot of them are going to have more modest homes in some of the more expensive areas, like we're in here in the U.S. Or in the East Coast. Many of them are going to have like older townhouses. They might be renting. They may not own their own home. If they're in the Midwest or in the South or some of the areas where it's a little more affordable, they probably could own a home. It might not be the fanciest home, but it would be, 2 or 3 bedrooms, maybe a garage, maybe not. They might have to park on the street. It might be a little bit older. It might not be in the most prime location. So you would see that happening with their home ownership. It's very regionally dependent. In terms of household labor, this class tends to have a lot of different people involved in the household labor. Mom's still doing most of it. Dad's doing some. The kids are expected to contribute quite a bit. Many working class kids may have to babysit their siblings. They may have to cook dinner for their parents when their parents, come home from their long day installing glass in people's homes or cutting hair or doing whatever it is that they are doing. But they also have another group of people involved, and that would be extended family members and neighbors and friends. So maybe, you can't really afford to get your kitchen redone, but your brother works for a company and installs cabinets, so he comes and does that in your home. Maybe, you'd like to get your hair done, but you can't really afford to go pay a bunch of money at the salon, so your, sister-in-law who's a hairdresser comes and dyes your hair at her house or at your house. So they tend to really look out for each other. The joke that I make is if my car breaks down, I want my car to break down in a working class neighborhood because someone will be there to help you change that tire. They will get out of their car. They might have a jack in the back of their car and they'll be ready to do that. There's a real ethos of kind of looking out for your neighbor, something that you really don't see among the upper middle class. They are don't if your car breaks down in an upper middle class neighborhood, they're calling the police. They're probably not coming out to help you.